Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have an amazing guest. We have Peggy Coffeen joining us today. How are you, Peggy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Tracy.
I am so excited. I'm chatting with another podcaster. For those of you guys that know Peggy, great. For those of you that do not, Peggy is a show host of the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. And today we're going to be chatting about all things business, dairy management, and leadership. So welcome, Peggy. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much for having me. And a big fan of you, Tracy, and the work that you do. So it's a pleasure to be your guest and not just a listener.
Oh, you're such a gem. Thank you. Okay, so I want to know all about you. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, where you worked before, who you are, what you do, and then we'll roll into a little bit about your podcast. I have some fun questions, so I'm excited for this episode. So take it away. Who is Peggy?
Sure, I'll jump right in. And so I'm Peggy. I live right now just outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and my home is a little dairy farm in southern Wisconsin, just south of Madison. So for all of your dairy friends and listeners out there that know World Dairy Expo in Madison, I grew up about a half hour just south of there. And I always say I grew up in a little red barn milking 50 cows and throwing hay bales and driving tractors not very well. And so that was my background, small town, growing up on the dairy, and pursued dairy communications for my career. And so a good chunk of my career was as a dairy magazine editor. And most of that time was with Progressive Dairy Magazine. So I oversaw certain pieces of content and hosted the podcast for Progressive Dairy in the US. But I also got to learn a little bit about Canadian dairy through some interactions with Progressive Dairy Canada as well. And so I spent most of my career doing that. And about a year and a half ago, I took the leap and ventured off on my own to start Uplevel Dairy and the Uplevel Dairy Podcast.
Fantastic. And what a perfect background to run your own show, your own platform. You were doing it already, so that's amazing. And so cool that you took the leap to do it for yourself. So very cool. I love.
A little crazy.
Yeah, you know what?
There's an intersection between those two things.
You have to be, though. I'm big on entrepreneurial, on mindset, on business, and agriculture. That's kind of where my podcast meets.
Yes.
And to be self-employed, you really actually have to be on the intersection of crazy and brave, and then balancing that line.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess, expand on that a little bit with that entrepreneurial side and the farming side, just as you talked about, Tracy, I had got my feet wet in entrepreneurialism by starting a totally different business about 4 or 5 years ago. And that was when it became a thing here in Wisconsin that you could grow hemp for CBD, for like the health and wellness benefits of CBD. So we started growing that on our little hobby farm, and I turned that into a direct to consumer business and brand from our farm. And so that was how I kind of got started in being an entrepreneur. And it was just as I started to do those things on my own, and really have a vision for a way to serve people in a very fulfilling and meaningful way. That's really what taught me kind of, how to develop, well, for one, the skill set and the mindset, but as you said, it's that courage too, and the bravery to say, you know what, I can actually do more than just this on my own. And so that was kind of the background that really gave me that courage to do what I really wanted to be doing in the dairy space too.
Ooh, I love it. I knew I was going to love this conversation, Peggy. I knew it. I'm excited. Okay, why don't you touched on it a little bit. You had your journey. You started off with the CBD business, kind of went there. The podcast.
Yeah.
Where did that idea start brewing? I guess that was your background, but where did you go, hey, I should do this for myself? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny how when you look back on a trajectory, just like I'm sure too, Tracy, when you look at, oh my gosh, how did you get from corporate and for this path to where you are now in the farm? And and when I look back at what got me into the spot where I'm at right now, the kind of the big timestamps that came along the way were when I would sit down at the table, and maybe it was in the kitchen and maybe it was in the farm office when I would be going out to dairy farms to do stories for my job as a writer, as an editor, as a podcast host. And we talked about all things dairy, right? And one of the areas that I covered was new buildings. And so I would go out to these dairies that had just expanded. They built these beautiful new rotary parlors and they added cows and everything was exciting and new and beautiful. And as I would sit down with folks, through those conversations, what I would start to notice would just be a shift and a change in their posture when they actually, talked about some of the tough parts of that
Mm,
growth and expansion.
mm,
And that's where I began to see that adding cows was the easy part. But all of a sudden, these dairy owners, and farm families were saying, oh my gosh, I was not prepared to manage people.
mm.
Oh my gosh, the biggest thing I'm pulling my hair out over is trying to figure out how to, work with employees. And oh my gosh, look at all the additional zeros that are now in our debt and in our, balance sheets that we didn't have before because of this growth and expansion. And so I remember sitting across the table from a manager at one of those dairies one day, and I could just see it in his eyes. I could just see that he was tired. He was weary. He was burnt out, right? He was burnt out. And I said, hey, I'm like, who's helping you? Like you've got the cow thing figured out. You've got the tech thing and the equipment thing figured out. Who's helping you learn how to manage people? And he looks at me and he's like, nobody. Nobody. And, that was one of those defining moments a couple of years ago when I really started to see and just pick up on that more and more that, really the challenges that the most progressive and forward thinking dairy farms and farmers and families were facing, it wasn't about how can we grow bigger calves and how can we get more milk out of a cow. It was about how can we learn how to manage our business? How can we learn how to manage people better so that we can do all the other things we want to do and so that when we actually grow our business, our life becomes better and not worse. And so it was like kind of all these little things that came along. And, at the same time, I was also going through this growth of my own, business that I had on the side. And I started tapping into resources because I didn't know a dang thing about business. I had no idea what I was doing. And so what I started doing was listening to, some podcasts and I had a couple of groups that I plugged into for networking to ask questions to. And it kind of clicked one day when I was out for a run and I'm like, I wish that there was a place, just like for me at that time, I had wished that there was a place I could find everything I needed, to meet me where I was at with quick, very pointed pieces of information to help me with this little CBD business that I had that I was trying to figure out. And it occurred to me that I'm like, that's what our farmers really want too, is something like that. And so that was where Uplevel Dairy kind of, became the little brainchild. Was out for a nice long run one summer morning a couple of years ago, before it was ever a podcast and before that even came into reality, was just kind of all these little steps along the journey that revealed a problem and had me looking around saying, where's the solution? And then realizing that if I'm the one that sees it, then I'm the one that's got to just go do it. So that's how I got where I'm at.
Oh, I love it. That speaks directly to me on so many levels. And I'm sure it speaks to our audience too. In my segments, when I talk to different guests, we always talk about strategy. So growing the animals, growing the crops, and then there's the people part. And they say the people part is the soft skills. I'm like, the heck with that. That's the hard skills because you know what? Farmers are good at growing crops, good at growing animals, but the hardest thing in life, and I don't care if you're a people person or not, the hardest thing is managing and working with people. And like, employees and working with family members. And that's a lot
Yes.
of the stuff you talk about on your show, I talk about on this show. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, no, let's just talk real here. If we're talking about transition planning, it's actually pretty easy. There's just easy. It's simple, but not easy, but it's very technical. And there's professionals. The hardest part is dealing with people,
Mm.
managing people, working with your family. And let's be real, nobody talks about that stuff. And
No,
it's on
no.
everybody's brain. Nobody's like, oh, I'm worried about how that will is going to look and be outlined. Everybody's like, no, I'm worried if I talk about transition planning or I bring on one of my children that my family is going to fall apart. And
Yeah.
I'm so worried that I'm actually paralyzed and I don't know what to do. Therefore, I don't transition plan because of fear and the people part of it, not the business part. So I love that you say
Yes.
that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's,
you're so spot on. See, it doesn't matter if it's the US or Canada, and doesn't
yeah.
matter if you're farming canola or milking cows. Like it is all comes down to these same things that challenge any business, right? But so much are family farm businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that leads perfect into one of the things I want to talk to you about. Switch gears a little bit and really put on the dairy hat and draw from your wisdom, your conversations that you're having, and take a deep dive into dairy, your world right now. So, pivoting. I want to go here. We're going to go a few places, okay, Peggy? We're going to go
I'm along for
dairy.
the ride.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to take you for one. We're going to do dairy and we're going to cover a lot of stuff. And whether it's dairy or beef or grain, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about that I want to ask you is going to really apply to all sectors. And then I want to flip back and do some mindset stuff at the end and ask you a few really cool questions. So, why don't we go to dairy? What do you see as the greatest risk for dairy farms right now?
Yeah, oh, it's such a good question. And going back again to the fact that whether we're looking in the US or Canada, some of the challenges are going to be very similar. And a lot of it right now comes down to, we're looking at some extremely high interest rates and extremely high cost of production and rising input costs. And so these are like daily conversations at my house because my husband also happens to be an agriculture lender. So so this is like his world that he lives in and my world of trying to help people, solve problems and provide information. But, a lot of that cost structure is what's really put a lot of stress on the industry is, we've got obviously milk prices have been lower in this last year and had some pretty hard downs and some ups, but some pretty hard downs this last year, especially. And then you take that and then you put the inflation and the interest rates and just that rising cost of production on top of that. And that's no different than, that's something that a lot of farmers and agriculture are facing. But I would say one thing that's been a newer challenge that's come up to dairies in the US, and I would speak to this particularly in my Midwest region from where I'm at in Wisconsin, is, you guys are in Canada. Supply management has been a thing for a very long time, right? And technically, we don't have supply management here. However, what we are seeing are more of the, co-ops and milk procurers that are putting restrictions on how much milk that they're willing to take or how much milk they're willing to pay for from the farms. And so essentially we are now, becoming more into that sort of environment for supply management in the US when we hadn't before. And so, that becomes a challenge because if you were to go back 10, 15, even 20 years here in Wisconsin, we're in such a growth mode, right? Like the more cows, as long as you could get all your ducks in a row to milk more cows and make more milk, you could sell it, right? There's plenty of places that would take that, and that wasn't the challenge. Well, now, things have changed. Things have changed. And if you're a producer that's looking to grow and expand your operation, you better darn make sure that you have a guaranteed home for your milk before you break that ground and before you get that loan. And here again, like these are dinner table conversations at my house, that I would have with my husband. But that's been one of, I would say, those things together have really posed some major challenges for our producers, US, across the board, but specifically here in the Midwest, where that's a little bit new for us. We've just kind of had this ability to produce beyond a designated capacity for so long. And now it's really, really looking at, it's not just about the pounds of milk being produced. Also, it's about what's in those pounds of milk. Really looking at how can we manipulate those components to be able to have more value for every pound of milk that's shipped or that's shipped. So it's looking at more of a strategic approach to milk production that is a bit of a shift from what we've experienced here in the past. And then other, kind of risk factors and threats that I would say I hear coming up from producers in the US and in, whether it's my region or outside of my region. I think one of the ongoing challenges that producers face is the labor market, right? Like so many producers that I talk to, it's for one, it's maybe it's finding people, and in some remote areas, it can be hard to attract people in general. But then it's also, once you have people, being able to find the right people with the right skill set, or the people that are trainable to be able to do the jobs. And so, as much as that's a challenge, it also opens up some cool opportunities with technology that some dairies are using to be able to manage that part of the situation. But I would say, the other challenge that our U.S. producers are facing, and that's always kind of that's going on in the back of their minds and in the background, sometimes more forefront, sometimes more background, is environmental challenges, and also the consumer challenges that we face as far as the consumers idea of what we do, how we do it, and also their appetite for dairy products. And then, as our market, it's our ability to market and create products meeting their tastes and their preferences. And so I think those are kind of those challenges that are always in the background, or sometimes right in front of us as well, are dealing with the environmental regulations and then also the consumer preferences.
Fantastic. And you're right, whether it's USA, Canada, whether it's dairy, beef, except for a few things you touched on, all the risks are all the same to farmers. And, I haven't been farming that long. I mean, we've been doing it long enough, but I mean, not 40 years, but just in the number of years that we have been farming, it just seems everything's getting a little more dramatic. Obviously, things are getting more expensive. It seems that the industry lacks maybe a little bit of stability that it used to have with all the wars and everything going on. So and then again, with a communications background, there is the pressure from the 98% of people that don't farm on farmers. And then we're all on social media, and then you're taking that in. It just seems that it's the perfect storm for farmers, right?
Yeah, and it's challenging, but there's conversations that I'll have with people that have been in this industry a long time, and actually one that I just spoke with recently, Mary Ledman, with Rabobank. And funny thing, she's from my same little small town in southern Wisconsin, which is pretty cool because she's a global strategist and economist, and amazing. But in talking with Mary, and she's been in this business for a really long time, and she's like, it's a cycle, right? Like this has been a tough cycle, an especially tough cycle on the dairy side, but it's a cycle. And she's like, there will be people that come out winning, and the ones that are going to win are the ones that that are really strategically having conversations with the people that buy their milk and saying, what do we need to do to be a preferred provider of milk to our co-op or to our processor. And that's a little bit different conversation than it used to be, in the past, where, like I said, there was a home for that milk. Now there must be a much more strategic approach to finding that home.
Interesting. I was thinking about something as I was walking around the yard, and I just realized you look at the challenges and you look at how you can serve farmers and provide good information. I said, really at the end of the day, there's always been innovation. There's always been something new coming to knock out the old. We
Yeah.
just need to innovate and be resilient and go from there. So you mentioned some positives, and it's easy to get stuck in the poor me, this is what's going on. And hey, they are all legit concerns.
Yeah.
Do you want to change gears a little bit and talk about opportunities? And I know you've touched on them throughout the conversation already. Do you want to go into some opportunities that you guys are seeing right now?
Yeah, I would love to. And I think that's a great way to look at this brighter side of dairy and agriculture. One thing that has really come up recently in conversations that I've had with dairy producers is this next gen. And I'm going to consider next gen about 30-ish to 40, 45-ish, that generation that's kind of transitioning into ownership and management and leadership on a lot of farms. And what I see in that generation is really interesting, and I think it's very positive for the future. And in fact, I just had done a panel at World Dairy Expo with 3 young producers, and a couple of the big takeaways that I had from that as far as the opportunities in the future are, number one, that this next generation, I really do see more of a personal focus and desire for what we call like that work-life balance. And in agriculture, work-life balance is like kind of a term that it seems a little bit foreign because work and life go together, most of the time, and there isn't much balance between the two for many of us, right?
Yeah.
And so, what I was hearing when I was talking to these young producers, and I was asking them questions about, like what is it that, where do you see, or what do you want your farm to look like in 10 years? And, about culture and values and vision and things like that. And they were saying things to the effect of, they wanted to be able to go on a vacation sometimes. They wanted to be able to get away from the farm. And I think that's a benefit because what they also were saying is we want that for our employees too. And so when you think about this bigger picture of employment and the challenges of a labor market, I think there's actually a really interesting advantage that the next gen has as they come into management. If they do have kind of this veil of understanding and appreciation for the fact that they actually want to see their employees have some of that work-life balance as well and build that into their management systems. And so I think that's really interesting. And a kind of a little bit of a theme that I was noticing was coming up. And so that I would say is kind of one of the bright spots when we look, forward at the next generation of management and ownership and leadership on farms. And so I don't know if that's something that you have picked up on in your conversations too, Tracy, but does that resonate with you at all too?
Absolutely. And you just look at the dynamics in agriculture, and I look at family that I know, and I'll reference it loosely to be respectful, but I look at my grandparents, traditional, they had 11 children, lived on the farm.
Yeah.
Things were a tough go. I mean, literally, they founded the farm. It wasn't easy. We got to give it to them. But
Yes.
the grandparents' generation, they farmed. They didn't really gallivant around the country on holidays and do all this stuff, right? It's a different
Right.
world. And I mean, they were born into a world that was totally different. So you see the grandparents' generation, and I seen
Yeah.
that. And then we see our parents, how they farmed, and probably us that are getting in and taking over ownership. At this point, we're going, okay, grandparents didn't have a life. Parents may have went the polar opposite or followed into that.
Yeah.
You know what? There's social media. We have access to knowing what is around the world. We have income. We're a different generation. We don't want that. You know what? I don't want to
Yeah.
be tied to I love my farm. I love my farm.
Mhm.
But we all know the world is bigger and we want a break, and that's we just want to farm differently. So it resonates personally, and if I look at the generation I work with and the others of similar age bracket, we don't want to do farming grandparents and parents style. Not at all.
No, and I think that's what you bring up, Tracy, is a challenge that I think a lot of people face is having the courage, go back to, the word courage, right? To be able to say, I want something different. And to be able to say that sometimes to their own parents, if they're in business together, or their own family members, to really be able to take ownership of the life that they want. Because, the thing about owning your own farm or owning your own business is so many of us do this because we say we want freedom, right? Like there's a freedom that comes with being in charge of your own vision, being on your, being in charge of your own business. But, but one thing I know I've learned is that with freedom comes discipline, or like when there's more freedom, you have to be that much more disciplined. And
Yes.
sometimes the discipline is, understanding what you want, being able to articulate that, and also being able to stop working sometimes is the hardest discipline. And, I go back to growing up milking 50 cows, and we never left the farm, right? Except for junior Holstein convention once a year. And that was my big trip, right? The junior Holstein convention. And that wasn't the life that I wanted for my kids. I wanted to be I want to go to the sporting games. I want to do those things. And I think that's, it's so I think sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to want something different than the way that we were raised, and to be okay saying it.
That's fantastic. One of my favorite things, mindset. And I know we're going to talk about it more. I am all about mindset. And that's a big one. Is what you just said there is a quotable, being okay with wanting different than what we've seen. Very often we admire our grandparents, right? We admire our parents.
Absolutely.
They've paved the path. We think that's how it's supposed to be done, but sometimes we're not like computers. We don't get a software upgrade, right?
Right.
We take on our environment that we grew up in. I mean, 97% of our brain and thoughts are formed by the time we're 7. So as an adult, and if you continue to grow up and farm with your parents, it's very hard to break the pattern, break those
Yeah.
expectations, and say, no, okay, we're not bad farmers if we want to leave the farm at least once a year. We're not
Yeah.
bad farmers if, right? I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
important.
And I
Yeah,
think the next growth opportunity from there is when you can get to the point to say, I'm actually better when I do it.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
I think we're right here. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, again, we're naturally incorporating it, but you chat a lot about how leadership needs to evolve. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about this topic of leadership, I lean back on a personal story of where I learned a very strong leadership lesson from a dairy farmer about, oh my goodness, it might have been 7 or 8 years ago now. But great, great dairyman here in Wisconsin, and really into leadership. And I was in his office, and he had all of these like John Maxwell leadership books behind him. And he's like totally into all this leadership stuff, right? And here I was in my late 20s, and like kind of at that stage in life where you're like, just trying to, keep a baby fed and asleep, and like grow your family and get your work done. And I remember being in the office with him and thinking like, oh my gosh, like I am so inferior to this person who has just dug into leadership development, because I'm over here just, trying to survive. Like it was just in that stage of motherhood. Please tell me you can relate.
I don't have kids, but I have
but
I have cousins,
but
I
you
have
get it.
aunts, I have
Yeah.
all of that. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so it's at that stage. And I think a lot of people, hit that point too, where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to, get through the day right now, with all the things. And I
Mhm.
remember sitting there in the office, and thinking, oh my gosh, like this man is like just so digging into leadership. And he was, at the process of growing his dairy at the same time too. And so after I visited with him, I sent him an email, and I'm just like, hey, like I could really use some help with some goal setting and just developing myself. And he was so kind. And he emailed me back a question. And maybe you've heard this question before, but the question was, if you were on an airplane that was crashing, like and the oxygen masks drop down from the ceiling, who do you put the oxygen mask on first?
Yep.
And Tracy, go ahead, tell us the answer.
As a mother, I'm not a mother, but if I was a mother, I'd say, of course, I'd put it on my dear precious kids. They're the most important. But I know that's not the right answer, and you can take it away.
Yeah, well, let's just say I sent him back an email with the wrong answer 3 times.
Yeah, there you go.
And
Typical
I'm
mom.
like, and I was like, I was a pretty studious individual, so I was like, what do you mean I'm wrong? Like, what do you mean I like gave you the wrong answer and I failed the test, right? And but the takeaway that he was trying to get through my head was lead yourself first, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first, and that lead yourself first mentality is I bring it up because I think that it is so fundamental to the leadership needs of any business owner and any person that is working with other people. And because essentially, if you're managing and leading and owning, you are in leadership. And the sooner you can own that role, the better. And the sooner that you start to become self-aware of how you lead and where your strengths are and where your shortcomings are, the better off you are too. And so this plays into our dairies because, going back again to the dynamics of growing and scaling dairy farms, where all of a sudden, maybe it's still a family business and there's still family members, but perhaps now you have 20 other people who aren't related to you, who are on your team and who are looking to you for leadership. And if you are not consciously cultivating your own personal leadership within yourself, then what you may not realize is that however you show up that day and over the long term is creating culture. And there's a young man that was on one of my podcasts, and he was 26 years old, Tracy, and he is managing like a pretty good sized dairy here in Wisconsin. And my goodness, like way smarter than me at 26, right? And he said, you're either always creating, he said, you're always creating culture.
Oh.
And it's either going to be a good or bad. And so he had made this choice to really consciously cultivate the culture by being, first of all, aware of himself and his daily actions, and and looking at that as the foundation of culture. And so I think all of these pieces come together when we look at the evolving leadership needs of our dairy farms, is that when you all of a sudden go from being in family situations, you were the kid maybe, right? And then you become the employee. Well, all of a sudden now you're owning a new role, and the way that you act every day and the way you carry yourself and the things you think about and the actions that you take, those things are all setting culture. And that's where self-awareness comes in. And, I see this on dairies, but yeah, I'm also going to be vulnerable enough to say that I've realized that I have to do it as a business owner too. Like I have a small team that supports me in both of my businesses, and having high level conversations with really amazing dairy farmers that are really good at this stuff has helped me say, okay, where do I need to make sure I'm stepping up to lead my own teams and to show up the way that they need me to show up, so that they're motivated and engaged, and so that I'm being a person that they actually want to work with and want to believe in the mission. And so that's where I kind of see, this bigger picture of the evolution of leadership on our farms as they grow and scale. And it comes back to leading ourselves first and understanding that the way that we lead, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is going to influence everything else around us.
Nice. I love it. And the hard thing I find in the entrepreneurial space, like when you're building a business, you're going to be listening to a bunch of podcasts, you're going to be reading the books, Scaling Up. They talk about culture. I'm happy that that conversation is coming into agriculture, kind of that agriculture meets mainstream entrepreneurial. That's what I love and try to bring to this show as well. But sometimes, and it's hard you don't know what you didn't know until you know what you don't know, right? I find that in life. Yeah. And to me, it's like, try explaining to a farmer how mindset is important when agriculture is a very production action oriented. How do you Do you, do you know what I mean? I
Yes.
sometimes find it's a very intangible concept where they go, mindset, who cares? I got to go milk the cows. You know what? I got to get in the tractor. I don't really care about mindset, right? I'm a doer. So
Yeah.
I know you've again touched on this several times throughout, which is beautiful. But do you want to touch on the importance? And I know you're passionate about this. You bring this to your show just the same as I do. Why is mindset so important? And there's the leadership of self and others, but why is, if you had to sell somebody on the importance of mindset, you're selling a farmer, what would you say? I'm putting you on the
Yeah.
spot here.
Well, I think I, I'm going to answer in a probably a bad way, but,
I love
but,
it.
I don't know that the term mindset resonates, but
Okay.
what does resonate are problems, right?
Mm,
And we can identify the things that are keeping us up at night. And
yeah.
so, there have been times like, well, before I went out on my own with Uplevel Dairy and started my podcast, I intentionally spent time talking about 20 different dairy producers and asking them, like, what's on your mind? What's your biggest challenge, that you're facing? What's keeping you up at night? And sometimes what came out of those conversations, maybe it was employees, maybe it was culture on the dairy, and maybe it was the family dynamics. But when you really start to peel back the layers of those onions, you can start to see that there is, in some cases, for some folks, it's a way of thinking that may have been serving them well because they were in a really great spot with their mindset. Um, Others that you could see through those layers of the onion, that mindset was at the core, of that onion when you started peeling it back. And so, I think the word mindset, for those of us in the entrepreneurial space like you and I, we can like, drink anybody's Kool-Aid and say, yes, we totally get mindset. And sometimes I think that farmers don't always own their role as a part of the entrepreneurial crowd. But those that do and that choose to plug into some of that training and those conversations, they start to become more familiar with that term of mindset, and then start to recognize that sometimes we have to change ourselves in the way that we think, because that is really, in some cases, at the end of the day, that might be the root of the problem that we have in having a conversation with our, mom that holds the checkbook, right? Or maybe there's a mindset block that is at the root of why we have a hard time being compassionate toward an employee, or taking the time to listen to them and show them some, empathy or support, because we didn't get that when we were kids and we, on the farm, right? And so I think it's, the mindset conversation, like we can use that term, but I think it manifests in all of these different ways that farmers can identify. They just don't, maybe always, they see the challenge that keeps them up at night and that stresses them out and makes them grumbly, right? But when you really, really start to, take a few steps back and peel back those onion layers, that's where you get sometimes to the root that it may not be that everybody else is the problem. It may be that we're the ones that have to change. And I mean, I say all this not to judge. I say it because I've had to do it. I've done this myself, right?
Mhm. Doing the work. Peggy, you didn't answer that poorly. That was probably about the most brilliant answer I have heard. And you're so right. The terminology is great for mainstream people and people that are drinking the Kool-Aid. Where we need to bring it in is the ability to show up and solve your problems to get to a successful end goal, right? My favorite quote, and when I learned this and sat on it, and then ended up showing up to problems that I was creating because I'm the common denominator, right? Tony Robbins, life or business, take it either way, is 80% psychology, 20% business. And to
I'm
me,
writing it down as you speak.
oh, it's my favorite. And if I don't say it to myself in my head, probably once a day, I'm doing something wrong, because at the end of the day, what we think and how we process and the stories we tell ourselves is 80% of the battle. I mean, again, farming's super hard. but it's simple. We need to raise the crops, raise the animals. Again, there's a million things in there that make it complicated, but farmers are great farmers. Now, let's say I'm Gen 2 and I want to take over the farm. The psychology and the story I'm telling myself and how I'm showing up and what I know and how I act, I am taking it from in here, living it out in person, and then causing those situations. So every time I talk to a guest, I just want to get to the gold nuggets. It's not the strategy over here. It's the psychology, and how can we help farmers learn to show up, learn how to solve the problems while going, oh, wait a minute. Every time I talk to dad and mom about transition planning, it ends up in like a blow up fight. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm usually the one that gets impatient. Oh, maybe I need to show up different to have a different result, right? This has been what I have taken from the entrepreneurial world and go, okay, here's what's happening. How am I causing this? This is what's happening. How can I reframe this story? Maybe mom and dad don't hate me. Maybe they don't want to keep the farm from me. Maybe it's not this, is this. Maybe the problem is mom and dad don't know how to do the steps, don't want to cause conflict. Maybe they get defensive because they don't know. And every time I ask them, I end up cornering them. And when I corner them, right, if you corner anybody, they'll fight or flight depending on your personality. So maybe the way I'm showing up, the way I'm asking the questions, the way I'm responding is continuing to cause the same circumstances, right? And every time I have a conversation and I go to transition planning, because I can see this, generations dealing with generations. That's how you have reacted with your mom and dad all of your life. And you're going to continue to do it. Same results. So how do we change? And mindset isn't some like, ooh, Pollyanna, it's going to be great, even though my crops just got hailed on. That's a small part. That's optimism versus pessimism. That's a small part. It's mindset, thinking about things, how you act, right? Anyways, my tangent, because I love this
No,
stuff.
I love it. I love it because it, like you were saying the things that really there aren't a lot of people in our farming industry and egg industry that can articulate that so well and really put it into perspective. And I think you just did that so beautifully and so relatably, right? And it can be really challenging when we realize, like you said, that we're the ones that have to change. And and as you were talking about transition planning, something else that kind of popped into my mind too that I think we often forget is, I guess a couple of things is, and we'll take that transition planning, just as an example here, because it is such a big deal, is for one, the emotions that are involved with transition planning, because all of a sudden we're talking about death, we're talking about loss, we're talking about sometimes, the division of assets, and that can be really uncomfortable. But the other thing that I think sometimes we neglect to consider too, and have an amount of empathy for, is the baggage, the generational baggage that our parents have carried with them. Totally. That becomes part of how they handle these situations. And, and we bring some of that into our own lives from however, those things have been passed down. But the things that we talk about in our generation right now, we're so much more open. Like, I'm guessing, Tracy, that if my parents and your parents or grandparents sat down and had a conversation about agriculture and farming in the US and Canada, that they wouldn't be talking about mindset, right?
No, not at all.
And they wouldn't be talking about things that brought up emotions, and they wouldn't be talking about things that were part of what maybe they considered, baggage. And I think there's so much of that goes into these conversations, and that's what makes it hard, right? That's what makes it hard. It makes it hard when you know what you know about yourself. It makes it hard when you don't know what you don't know about generationally what's been passed down in the way that we have these conversations too.
No, it's really hard to to change yourself, to
Yeah.
break the habit, to stop being yourself. Unless you have
Yeah.
outside knowledge or an outside circumstance to come in, you just be who you are. And a majority, we're going to hate hearing this, but a majority of us are 97% made up of old thoughts, beliefs, actions from the previous generation. Like you said, we just carry on. I mean, and again, where I see it clearly in my friends, everybody I know that farms together, well, there's grandpa. Grandpa's a certain way. And then now he reacts to the kids, the parents' generation, a certain way, continuing that. So maybe there's a pattern of avoiding conversation on the farm or massive conflict, right? There'll probably be, and maybe let's call it a healthy middle in there. There'll be 3 of them. So depending who your family is, that's carried right down. So if grandpa, and I pick on the men, women, it's the same, but we'll just leave that.
We've got our own role on that.
Yeah, we'll just leave that aside. But let's go to my family, but and families I know around. If it's a conflict driven person, that's grandpa, extroverted, whatever the personality is, they set the tone for today's farming operation. How many years ago? Because they acted a certain way with the next generation. So whether that's avoiding conversations, fighting, or being a healthy middle, I don't know who those weird people are, but good on them. But if there's conflict, okay, so dad thinks it's okay to just start yelling and swearing or being aggressive and mean as soon as something comes up. That's how he's going to react if he doesn't know, if he doesn't want to talk about it, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens to this generation? Well, we were raised by 2 generations of people that think it's okay to yell. What are we, right? And it's just so prevalent in farming because we are just working together. In the workplace, Peggy, sorry, you'll get me on tangents all the time here.
I love it.
In the workplace, think of that. It's random strangers that come together. Let's not say family business outside of farming. It's random businesses that random people that end up working together. Well, there's different personalities, different structures, training on how to communicate. There's meeting structures, but we're not allowed to take our family patterning into our job roles so much. We got to conform, right? But it's totally different. Anyways, I don't know if that makes sense.
It totally does. It totally does. And and I think that's where I think one of the, go back to opportunities for our dairy industry. And I think some of the greatest opportunities are in professionalizing the way that even families, run their farms. And so whether it's just working within your own family structure or when you have, employees that you're starting to bring in that model, like you said, where, okay, so now we're bringing in people that aren't part of our family. Well, and I think one of the things that we all, can do, and I will say, like, this is even, myself and my own little, businesses that I have too, is really holding up that mirror and say, am I being someone I would want to work for? Right? Like, am I communicating clearly? Sometimes I'm not, right? Am I being optimistic and enthusiastic in front of the people that are, working for me in my business, because I have to be the leader and the most positive person in my business. Right. And am I setting the tone and the culture and the example of who I would want to work for? And I think that's one of the opportunities that we have, as we develop our own mindset, is to ask ourselves the tough questions.
And one more thing I want to add too, I think it's counterintuitive for business owners, entrepreneurials, farmers. We really like doing what we're doing and we want to get it done. Like you've said a few times, we're doers and we're good at our art, whether that's farming, selling, whatever our art is. Then we go into business. So if we're farmers, we farm. We don't, and I'll speak for myself, and this is a known thing, but we don't necessarily like leadership or having to manage people, right? We're super good at this and we want to do this, but now we need to manage people, right?
Yes.
I'll say it. I will say
And
it.
it's hard. It's hard. And
Yes.
it's hard for our farms. And, I think, I don't know about you, Tracy, but, being my own business has helped me to really understand at such a deeper level. And sure, it's a micro level compared to some of the farms that I'm talking with, regularly that have 20, plus employees and all of these moving pieces and parts. Like my business is just this tiny little, micro experiment compared to what they're doing. But I tell you, it is an experiment every single day and a glimpse of what it's like to be in their shoes. And I've always had such a great appreciation and compassion and admiration for farmers, including the ones that raised me. But it's even more so now that I can just get that little bit of a feel of what it's like to be in their shoes.
Not easy. Not easy.
No, no.
Okay, that was fantastic. I love any conversation about business and mindset and growth and just the hard things that nobody wants to talk about. I don't know about you, Peggy. When I started building a business, I thought, okay, I have these things in my head, these concerns. I'm like, oh my God, I feel fear. Oh, what's wrong with me? Like nobody likes to talk about this stuff. At the end of the day, we think we're special because we have our own little problems, our concerns. But at the end of the day, people are people. We're all going through the same
Yeah.
thing. And I think when we can bring it out, talk about it, name it, it just kind of, whether I've said this type of note in mental health, hey, we have bad days, we have good days. Some people struggle. When we
Yeah.
can just bring it out and talk about it, it takes that black cloud from over here. The fact that not everybody likes to lead or finds it natural, that's
Yeah.
okay. Acknowledge it. You're not a bad person. We're all going through the same experiences, right?
Oh my gosh. So I can relate on 100 levels personally, but it also really brings up a conversation that I just had. It's going to be a podcast that's coming out on Uplevel Dairy here pretty soon. And the dairyman that I talked to, we talk about some things that, he talked about how he did the 75 hard challenge. Have you heard of that?
I've done it. Yes.
You've
Yeah.
done it?
Yeah.
Okay. We should do a little group and do it together. But anyway, that's another conversation. But we talked about that, and he talked about how it really revealed to him that how much he was using alcohol in his life. And I'm like, ooh, man, like that's a vulnerable thing to talk about, right? And one of the things he talked about too was recognizing in his role on the team, on the leadership team of his family's dairy that he's a partner in and a part of. He's like, I'll never be the guy that is going to understand the balance sheet the best. He's like, my role is different. My role is, it's more with seeing people's potential and bringing it out in them and, putting the right people in the right places. And I just thought it was so awesome for him to be willing to be one to say these sort of things, right? Because back to your point of it just takes having kind of that environment where people can open up or listening to somebody else open up to know, for one, that you're not alone, and for two, that that it's okay and that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to be aware of yourself, and it's okay to discover who you want to be and just lean into that.
Oh, I love it. Isn't that, I find life, I've come up with this as like a little bit of a video game. You just show up and you conquer all the obstacles and you get all the prizes. But I think the real thing is just leaning into what you're good at and
Yeah.
owning it. And
Yeah.
just, I mean, like the kids say, YOLO, right? You only live once. So why are we making it harder on ourselves? Why are we
Yeah.
punishing ourselves, right?
Yeah. And I think that's all goes back to the mindset conversation and giving ourselves the permission to just be who we're meant to be and to get to know that person and to just continue to polish them, right? And step into the roles that we're here to serve in.
I love it. Okay. Pivoting just a little bit, but kind of saying on the same train of thought. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I want to pick your brain personally. and hear what's on your mind. I always love doing this to guests. So what is something you're really fired up about right now? And it could be good fired up, bad fired up. It could be personally, and it could be professionally. So open stage for you to talk about this.
Fired up. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a thing I'm really positively fired up about.
Okay.
And it just happened last night. So one of my hobbies that I really enjoy doing to give back is coaching Dairy Quiz Bowl. And so like that was something that I did as a kid and had incredible, coaches and mentors that really just laid this path, for life from doing Dairy Quiz Bowl. And so it's kind of something I give back to on my own. And so right now it's Dairy Quiz Bowl season. So we practice this once a week. And my 8-year-old is just starting Dairy Quiz Bowl. And so I get pretty fired up about Dairy Quiz Bowl in general. And if you ask any of the kids that I coach, they would say the same thing. But last night my 8-year-old was answering some of these quiz questions, and he was he was right. He was saying, like which stomach compartment does hardware occur in? He buzzes his little buzzer and he's like, reticulum. And I'm like, oh, my mother heart is just like overflowing, and like, oh, what's the first milk after, the cow has her calf? And he presses a little button and he's like, colostrum. And I'm like, oh, you're melting my heart. And so
That's awesome.
So that's something I'm getting pretty fired up in a good way about right now is for one, coaching. I have this amazing group. We've got about, oh gosh, 20 some kids in our county right here. And I've got a really awesome team now of coaches that we all work together to really mentor and work with these kids that all just are so passionate about dairy. It's insane, Tracy, the interest and the knowledge that these kids have. And I'm even more excited that one of them is my little boy. So
you know what? This is the first time in my life that I have heard about Dairy Quiz Bowl. Can you please share what this is?
Oh my gosh, it's so fun. So it's a youth program, and here in the US, it runs through the Holstein Association. And
Okay.
so in Wisconsin here, we have a state organization, and they have this program for kids, right? 21 and under is the age range. And so at our state competition, we'll have about, between our junior and senior divisions, probably 50 some teams of 4 people from each county, or multiple from county. We'll have multiple from our county because we have so many kids, but they'll compete against other teams from other counties, and it's all dairy-based facts and knowledge. And they have a little buzzer, and they get to hit the buzzer, and they get points if they get the answer right. And there's, a whole structure and all that for it. But it's all based on specific dairy knowledge. Wow. So that's Dairy Quiz Bowl.
Spelling bee type of concept. Right?
Kind of, or like like a little quiz, not like what do they call it? Like a knowledge quiz bowl or whatever that they might have at school or something like that, but it's all dairy.
Either I am completely out of the loop, or we don't have this in Canada. Do you know if they have it in Canada?
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, because I know the Holstein Association is so strong, and supportive of, youth and showing and all that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had something. But it's definitely a thing here with our Holstein Association.
Oh, so cool. Okay, before I move on, do you have a bad fired up or anything else you want to add before I ask the next question?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. A book or video that has changed your life?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So can I answer with a couple of books?
Oh, please. More the better.
All right. So my number one book is the Bible. Every morning it's the Bible. And I will add to that something that's really helped me to deepen in my faith and my understanding of the word is I use an app on my phone, and I love that in this app I can read scripture in different versions. So there's like if you were to look at it, there's the traditional kind of King James version, but then there's also what's called like the Message version and the Passion Translation, and just these different ways of taking those words and making them more easy to read in this day and age with words that resonate with us better. It doesn't change the meaning, it just helps with the understanding. And so the Bible is how I start my day every day. And that's the number one leadership book. It's the number one marriage book. It's the number one parenting book. Like everything is in there. And the two other books that I would say, are kind of my compasses, one fits right in with that. And it's the one, it's called The Circle Maker, by I think it's Mark Batterson. He's a pastor. But it's one of those books. Like, do you ever have a book, Tracy, that you can like keep by your bed and you can like pick it up anytime, and it doesn't matter what page you open it to, you probably got something highlighted in it and it's just going to speak to you? Do you have books like that?
Oh, yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, so Circle Maker is one of those books for me, and it's the one I've had it out lately, and I always choose one word for every year to live by, and so this year the word was truth, and I already know that my word for 2024 is bold, and the Circle Maker is all about bold prayers for big things, and so that's really been resonating with me lately. And then I would say there's one more book, and it's behind me. You might have this one, High Performance Habits.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so High Performance Habits, so actually it was recommended to me by a dairy farmer friend of mine a few years ago. And he had done the coaching program through High Performance Habits as well. And I just thought I was so inspired by our conversation that, I got the book and I did do some of the program as well. But one of my big takeaways from the book, Tracy, was that, that book is all based on this author, and speaker that went out and said, I'm going to interview some of the top people, in business and see if there's some common denominators to their success. And in many ways, that really is what's inspired a lot of what I do on my podcast, is looking at who are some of the top performers in dairy farming, owners, managers, and the people that they lean on and trust for their support, and bringing them on, and then looking at what do they have in common? What are the things that they're doing that, maybe a different context, but really at the core, all very similar, that are leading them to be successful in the dairy business. And so that book has been a big inspiration to me as well. So do you have that one?
There's a few that I mix up. Who is that one by? Can you remember?
Brendan Burchard.
Okay. No, I was thinking of something else. There's a few that are all titled roughly the same. I was thinking it was a Stephen Covey book. I don't have that one. My goodness, my bookshelf is overflowing and boxes. Like have you ever watched a movie, Beauty and the Beast?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm gonna this is so embarrassing.
I can't
believe I'm bringing this up on my own show. I might even be blushing. You can guess my age. I've watched a movie, love it. But my favorite scene in that whole movie is when they are just going across the big library in the castle. That is the library I want. I love books.
Okay, what are you reading right now?
Oh my goodness. I am reading some very I'm reading some very tactical strategy business marketing books. Some Russell Brunson books based on different marketing tactics, sales pages, nice. Different strategies for building businesses, generating income. So that would be my entrepreneurial side of it. Nice. I'm blanking, and I'm always allowed 3 books. I've just limited my books to 3 books. I'm allowed to have 1 business one going on, 1 personal read, and 1 mindset read.
Ooh, so good for you.
And I'm blanking on it. It has been phenomenal. It is about, I think, Conversations with the Devil by Napoleon Hill. And
I'm saying it wrong. I have a different Napoleon Hill book by my bed. I have Think and Grow Rich.
Yes.
But I haven't heard of that one. Okay, I'll have to check it out.
This is a different one that came out later, and actually he only published it. He had passed and his wife had passed. It was very controversial views talking about the devil and all that kind of stuff. I'm just getting into it, but really putting the devil and then that part of it away. It's all about how we get off our mission in life and we end up drifting. And if we
Ooh,
don't have a strong goal that
ooh,
pulls us forward, we're like, I'm paraphrasing here, we're really like a ship at sea without a captain, right? Have you ever had a time where
mm,
you didn't know what your
mm,
next thing was or your goal, and you're just kind of
mhm.
like, you get up, you don't use your time productively? So I'm really moving into focus. My word of the year, if I had announced it, would be focus. It's just focus
Ooh,
on one thing, hard, strong until I do that, and then move to the next thing. So that's my, I guess, mindset read right now. And then, oh, then my personal read. Oh, I digress here. I could talk about mindset or books for hours on end. My personal read is Pillars of the Earth book series. Really good book series from way back in 1700s. It's fictional. This is my
oh,
fun book.
wow.
They just came out with the prequel and I'm just like absorbing that. So anyways, I love books. They change your life and I just can't
Holy.
stop reading because it's all in there. It's all in there.
Yes.
Everything you need to know in life is in a book, right?
Oh, I love it.
It is.
Awesome. Well, now I've got a few to add to my list.
I could send you a whole list and pictures of my books and I'd do a better job. Okay. I love your book suggestions. That was fantastic. I probably want to ask for like 10 or 20 more, but I won't. What is the best advice you've ever received?
Ooh, okay. So, um, it is this: only take advice from people who already are where you want to be.
Amen. Amen. So amazing. So amazing. I was going to include a follow-up and I didn't, but I think I might. I'll give you the opportunity and we can pass. I'm putting you on the spot, but I almost want to include it for the next one. What is the worst advice that you've ever received? Because if you think of it, good advice is amazing, but bad advice can be devastating, right? And actually, maybe I thought of that and you don't have to answer it, but I'm going to include it for sure for the next person. Bad advice comes from taking advice from the person that isn't where you want to be. We look, right? Just what you said, it
Yeah.
would be the
Yeah.
opposite.
Oh,
Taking
what a
advice,
shift. That's a
right?
total shift. Holy cow. You just like blew my mind, Tracy.
Well, if you think of it, and I learned this, I heard that quote, fortunately, at a young age. And I look at it, how many times do we go, oh, this is unpopular, but here we are. I've talked about Beauty and the Beast and unpopular advice. Um, how many times do we go to our parents, loved ones, friends, looking for advice on
Ooh,
something, and they don't have a hot clue? They also don't know what's in our best interest. And because we're conditioned to just answer questions, they give you advice. And if we don't realize, we're going to take advice from people that don't know, don't have our inner vision, and really aren't giving the best answer for what we need in life at the moment, right?
right. Absolutely, Tracy. And, and I think the other side of that too, to piggyback off of what you said before I actually answer your question is, sometimes it's those, it's, when we go to, some of those people for advice that it's a threat to, their comfort, right?
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, the worst advice, oh man, I had to think on that for a moment, but I think some of the I'll maybe put it in this frame of reference is, like when I started talking about, starting my first business, right? And started talking about, going on my own in my field in the dairy industry. There were a couple of folks that I talked to that, like that I trusted and respected and downright loved that, that just kind of said, oh yeah, I probably wouldn't do that, and but it all comes back to everything that you just said, right? Like it's the fact that like they were living a life that was great for them, but I didn't want their life, so why am I asking them what they think? Why am I asking them for their advice? Like, I don't want the life that they have. So why would I expect them to give me advice that's actually going to be in alignment with where I see my own future? Right.
Brilliant. That is brilliant. Way to go, Peggy. That you couldn't have said that better. I love that. I love that.
Did you have that? Did you run into that too?
I did. Yeah. I heard that quote and then I started looking and observing myself. I'm like, wait a minute, why am I asking that person that? They just don't even know anything about that.
Yeah.
Right. So if they answer, they're giving a biased opinion that isn't the best what I need to be listening to. And that can be quite dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I'm glad I asked you that then. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but I think
no, you're all good.
I'm gonna include that going forward because I think we can learn from great advice, but we can also learn just as much from bad advice that we either take or we don't take, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of great advice, I'm gonna set the stage here. You are 110 years old, or 20, or 30, whatever we're going to live till at that point in time. You're healthy, you're happy, you're on an island, and you're not sure if you're going to get off because you're in the middle of nowhere. So you have a small piece of paper and a pen, and you just need to leave one piece of wisdom, advice, a thought. Just like one little small bit that you can fit on that piece of paper. What would it be?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Well, first of all, I'm not one who's short on words, so I would be peeling the bark off of the trees to leave a few more than one.
Love it. Love it.
And writing things like this, it looked like the entire island would look like any one of my billion notebooks because there'd be stuff written on rocks and in the sand and carved into trees.
We're soul sisters.
But if you were to limit me to one piece of paper, of all the things that I would leave, I think this is going to pertain into, the conversation we just had. And I think it all comes back to the 5, right? The 5 people you spend the most time with. And to just be mindful of your top 5. And I say that because of everything we've just talked about. And those 5 people you become most like, right? And so you look at them and you get to choose. You get to choose the 5 people. But this also is why I do what I do with podcasting. And what got me into being a listener to podcasts in the first place was because they allow you to choose the voices that you have speaking into your mind and your heart, right? And I think that's the power of what we're doing is, I hope that, what I'm doing is a gift to the dairy farmers that are listening, and that it's a voice that they can have in their back pocket and literally in their ear that's helping them to be the best version of themselves in some way, solving a problem, giving them a little bit of inspiration, just something. And if I can be, one of those 5 voices for some folks, especially how it is. A lot of our farmers live in really isolated areas. And if you're on the farm, your 5 people that you are around physically, well, some of them you might be related to all of them. Some of them you may not even speak the same language as. So then how else are you filling in your top 5? And so that would be what I would leave on the note is, to just know that you become the sum of the 5.
Ooh, that is powerful.
So pick your 5 wisely. Ooh, and if you don't like the ones that are already in your environment, then pick the voices that you want in your ear and in your heart.
Yeah, that is the beautiful part about the world we live in now. We can do that with podcasts.
Yeah. Right? Just like they've done it for us.
Yeah. I love it. Those are amazing parting words. I want to give you the opportunity to add anything else if you want to, and then give a shout out on how producers can find your podcast.
Oh,
for you.
well, first off, thank you so much for having me, Tracy. And I've enjoyed this conversation that is beyond the normal realm of farm talk and really into the topics that are clearly near and dear to both of our hearts. And I would love for any of your listeners out there that want to follow along in the Uplevel Dairy journey and have that as one of the voices that's in your ear and in your heart. What you can hear on Uplevel Dairy on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube is conversations that are all about upleveling not just your skill set, but also your mindset in areas like business and management and leadership. And if you want to be one of those top performers in the industry that's chasing and seeking sustainability and profitability and excellence, then that's what you find on Uplevel Dairy.
I love it. And we will include links in the show notes for this episode. So go and check Peggy's show out. Peggy, thank you so much for being on the show. I loved this conversation. I knew I would, just based on who you are and the topics that you cover. I do believe we're soul sisters. So
I think
thank
so
you.
too.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for coming on the show, Peggy.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Tracy.
You're welcome. And you in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. If you love this conversation as much as I did, like it, share it, get it out there so other producers can learn about the great work that Peggy's doing. Thanks and see you next week. Bye-bye, guys.